So I stumbled across this recent debate between Alex O'Connor and Ben Shapiro on the topic of religion and whether religion is good or bad for society. I don't normally watch long debates like this, but I found this topic interesting enough that I did watch the whole way through, and I gathered some of my thoughts and some parts in the debate that I wanted to respond to. Alex is a great debater, and I always look up to him if I want a philosophical perspective on something related to atheism and religion, which is also ironic of me because I think philosophy has no place of discovering truth about the universe. It doesn't replace or compare to science in any way, shape, or form, but it is somewhat useful when it comes to the question on whether religion impacts society in a positive way or not. Now, in my opinion, I would definitely say no. The recent war between Israel and Hamas has really made me think about this question lately, and the more I think about it, the more I think religion is just a disease upon society. But of course, that's just my opinion. Let's see what Alex and Ben have to say about it. The debate is quite long, just shy of an hour and a half, but we're going to be jumping around a lot and hit some of the main points discussed.
The very mechanism that I think is responsible for eliminating the possibility of free will, that is, the drives that make people do what they do, like I say, do exactly that. Make people do what they do. They make them get out of bed in the morning. Why do you get out of bed and go and make your breakfast if there's no free will? So you go and get breakfast because there's no free will and something is driving you to do that that's outside of your control.
For sure. So to get back to the nihilism point, which you kind of put aside, so that means that this conversation is essentially worthless in any sort of real sense. I mean, effectively, we were driven here by evolutionary biology and environment to have this conversation. Everybody who's watching this is driven by evolutionary biology and environment to have a particular reaction to that thing, and ever round the cycle goes. That seems like a very purposeless life. Again, I'm drawing from a realm that is not evolutionarily biologically connected.
Okay, so here they're talking about free will. I still remember a long time ago watching one of Alex's videos on why free will does not exist being very enlightening to me, since I never thought about it in that perspective before. That being said, the more science is being done, the more we actually learn that free will truly does not exist. We've learned about the brain actually chemically making decisions a split second before we actually become aware of making that decision. We can manipulate people's choices using magnetic stimulations, the very concept of time as a dimension and how the fifth dimension potentially operates. Of course, we haven't debunked all definitions of free will, since that can come in many different flavors, but it seems pretty convincing, at least to me, that there is no free will. Now, does that mean everything is predetermined? Because I think there's a huge distinction that has to be made here. Personally, I think yes, but there's no real evidence for that, so let's not talk about that any further. Now, Ben thinks that not having free will is purposeless and void of meaning, to which I would say, why does that matter? I would say that someone who relies on someone else, in this case God, to create their purposes for them, that is true purposelessness. Okay, this next part they're talking about free will.
Uncaused decision-making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible. And therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from motion, is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. So I can't explain to you how the uncaused self makes decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheistic
But you have
framework.
a burden and I don't. Meaning that
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not. My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch.
But you see, Alex's position is not that a materialistic universe is the cause of all. You have to understand that rejecting a claim of religion being responsible for uncaused decisions does not mean you're a subscriber that everything had a materialistic origin. Alex's position is one of rejection, not one of a positive claim. In this case, uncaused decision-making has a very clear explanation without the insertion of belief of outside intelligence, which is a rejection of an implied assertion that religion is the only explanation. And yes, it looks like there is one thing I do agree with you on, Ben, and that's that your decision is indeed a huge escape path, an all-purpose card, if you will, that you can use whenever you cannot explain something, which, as we know in common debate fallacies, is a no-no.
I don't think the burden is on me there. I think you were the one who's making the claim that free will does exist, that there is this mysterious property of the universe
actually, that's not
escapes
true.
this determined or indetermined dichotomy. And then when I say that this is unintelligible to me and based on what I see to be fundamentally appeal to a law of logic, suddenly I'm the one making the claim. I'm the one with the burden who has to do the proving.
No, the actual claim that I originally made, if you recall, was a conditional claim. I did not claim free will exists, therefore God. I claimed if you believe free will exists, it cannot exist in a materialist universe. Now, you say, okay, fine, it doesn't exist in a materialist universe. I don't believe in free will.
Yes.
That's fine. That's totally plausible. As I said right at the top here, I'm not going to prove to you that God exists today. What I am going to say is that the vast majority of people throughout nearly all of human history have believed there is a thing called a self. It is a deciding self that makes these decisions. If you are a person who believes that, you're right. It can't exist in your world. So I'm not saying that it does exist. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're totally right, and all of this is just a series of chemical firings. That's quite plausible. That's fine. What I have said, and this is the argument that hasn't yet been rebutted, is that society does require an extraordinary number of people to believe that they are capable of making decisions for the good or for the bad. Because, again, not everybody is you. Not everybody is capable of waking up in the morning, putting one half of their brain on hold, the side that says, what I'm doing today doesn't matter, and we are all going to wind up in the cosmic nothingness of space anyway, and the sun's going to explode and eat the earth. Most people don't function that way. And so a functional society, a society that actually works, relies on people actually believing that their fate is in their hands.
That claim, society requires an extraordinary number of people to believe they are making decisions, is most definitely unfounded. Not only do you not have concrete arguments for that case, but there are plenty of people who most definitely don't believe in free will. Last I checked, people didn't just self-destruct when they held onto such a belief. And the reason is, our everyday lives, when it comes to motivating ourselves to conduct certain actions, to get on with our days, is hot-wired within people. For example, under the hypothetical situation that someone doesn't want to eat food because they're like, well, everything is predetermined already and free will doesn't exist, that doesn't fly because the will to eat and survive is hot-wired within our DNA. In addition, if we take a broader example, let's say someone job hunting, well, that's actually driven by human nature of future planning. Humans, being really the only animal that not only sets itself apart from other animals through our intelligence, but also the ability to plan for the future, has these habits hot-wired into us through millions of years of evolution. So in other words, habits and behaviors are ingrained into us, and the simple belief that free will doesn't exist isn't going to demotivate people, and it's not going to collapse society. There are even people who don't believe in free will. Take other countries that aren't so heavily religious. China, for example, which is a very atheistic country. People don't even think about free will and the society operates perfectly fine. Religious people love to argue that without religion, there'd be no motivation, no ethics, no morality, or no whatever. But they completely underplay the influence on how we were built from millions of years of evolution and the straight up hot wiring of our brains, which prevents us from going rogue. Alright, this next part, Aelx makes an analogy about how people follow ideologies.
If I meet a man who wants to kill me, or a friend, and he says that he doesn't believe in God, there's very little I can do to talk him out of that, except I can threaten him with legal sanction, I can threaten him with moral reproach, exclusion from the moral community, but there's not much more I can do. However, if a person says that he wants to kill me, and he believes that he wants to kill me because God has told him to do so, then I don't even have that minimal reproach available to me. Because there is no law written by any man of any time that could ever count one iota against the dictates of the creator of the universe. Therefore, if that God in fact does not exist, and if these moralities are in fact human inventions, then what you have in the grounding of an ethical system in the dictates, allegedly, of the creator of the universe is all of the arbitrariness and subjectivity and failure and faults of nihilism and human invented morality, with all of the certainty and all of the faith and all of the unanswerability of the creator of the universe. That to me seems a dangerous cocktail that we drink at our peril.
So many things there, and so much that you're saying is quite brilliant. I actually thought you were going in a different direction with that last example, which I'll explain in a second. So yeah, to start with the very beginning, obviously the idea of right and wrong. So there are many problems with the motivism. Alistair McIntyre does a good job sort of breaking down the problems with the motivism. But the sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention. And those moral absolutes have to be universally accepted. You can ground that, I suppose, in a sort of descriptive universe. The problem is that, to go back to your example, which again I think is a really interesting one, if a man comes to kill me, I think the real question of religion versus non-religion in the utility sphere here is it more likely that a man is going to come to kill you being a devotee of a religion that says that he must kill you, or is it more likely that a man is going to kill you out of self-interest because he is not a devotee of a God who says that killing is wrong?
Okay, but that's not the point of Aelx's argument. He's talking about devotion to ideology. The point of this hypothetical scenario is that when religion comes into play, people devote to it like nothing else. And when it's something as arbitrary as the teachings of the Bible, which not only has many horrible things written in it, but also leaves room for interpretation and cherry picking, which is why there are so many branches of Christianity to begin with, that causes for a dangerous system to be born because the followers of that religion are seemingly devoted so intensely to something that is essentially random and doesn't necessarily have the best interests of society in mind. And of course, anyone can have any ideology, and you can argue that in general as an arbitrary starting point to begin with, which of course is true, but the issue of religion is that it causes people to be devoted to a degree that they simply cannot be argued against to even have the slightest chance of swaying their opinions, which is the point that Aelx was trying to make regarding the man who is trying to kill you. So your point doesn't even make sense here in this context. Society is about creating a diverse amount of ideologies and weeding out those that are harmful. Religion prevents that by solidifying certain beliefs into people's heads in a devoted way unseen in any other scenario. Anyway, this next part is about Christianity in accordance to the development of society in the past.
A lot of people talk about how religion can make people happier, it can make people more socially cohesive, it can promote people to start families and have children. This is true of most religions. This is also true of Islam, which I'm not sure you would want to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm not sure you'd want to say is a force for good in the world. I don't think, in other words, that it's always a worthwhile trade-off. Now,
I agree with you, by the way.
Just because you mentioned the sort of culture of Europe and its success and America is indebted to Christianity. That Western civilization sort of depends and should be in gratitude to a religious tradition because it provided this kind of ethical framework in which this could have arisen. We hear about the scientific enlightenment. We hear about the grounding of ethics and God, the creation of natural rights, as if these things weren't established in resistance all the way along to the religious tradition. A society that today, I'll expand on this if you like. A society today that decides that religion throughout its history has been wrong about the position of women in society, wrong about the mortal fate of practicing homosexuals, wrong about the position of the earth in relation to the sun, wrong about the age of both of those celestial bodies, wrong about the common evolutionary ancestry of every animal, including the human animal, on planet Earth, wrong about the ownership of other human beings as private property, now has to contend with a religious tradition that doesn't come to us with contrition and apology and say, well, maybe we were wrong about these things. But no, these are all our things after all. We're going to claim these things. That is, I know that St. Paul says, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man. Rather, she should remain silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And that man is the glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. But don't you know that the social justice movement is essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? I know that the Old Testament not only explicitly condones the ownership of other human beings as private property, but gives detailed instructions about exactly how to buy and indeed take them, sometimes including as sexual property. But don't you know that the abolitionist movement was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, I know that Galileo was shown the instruments of torture by the Inquisition for having the temerity to suggest that the Earth might orbit the Sun rather than the other way around. But don't you know that the scientific revolution, which he authored, was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin?
Indeed, Aelx makes a good point here, and he takes it from a different perspective that I otherwise would have. Christianity likes to take credit whenever there's an abolishment of human rights violations or an advancement of the scientific method, ignoring the fact that the very acts preventing those progressive movements to begin with was in fact the religion itself. So as a result, it's not fair at all to say that religion contributed to the advancement of society today. Now, in my opinion, society would be just as progressed, if not more progressed, if religion didn't exist. But considering we only have one planet and not thousands to compare to, we'll never truly know. But similar to how I don't know, you also don't know. So please don't take credit for something you don't deserve. Anyway, let's see what Ben's response is.
So I would buy that, except for the fact that many of the people that you mentioned in these contexts explicitly counted themselves as religious believers and were speaking in the name of the religion while they were doing it. So to take the abolitionist movement as an example, I mean, William Wilberforce, obviously a tremendously religious person and a big believer in the New Testament. Isaac Newton, obviously deeply ensconced in the New Testament, right? Yeah, certainly important to the scientific revolution.
Okay, I don't think you were paying attention. The reason Christians like to take credit for this is precisely because they use the excuse that these people were religious. And then Alex's point is that they often ignore that the resistance against such progress was due to the entire system built upon religious beliefs to begin with, so it's unfair to take credit for something in which your religion actively hindered. Now, regarding these people being Christian, my response has always been the same. The people responsible for scientific progression and eliminating human rights violations were religious because they had to be. People in those times believed in God, and you were an outcast if you didn't. People were raised in religious households. They followed religious teachings. There was essentially no room for an atheist to come around to even exist, much less be responsible for a progressive movement. Again, back to my previous point, there's no way to actually tell since we only have one Earth to look at, but considering how much resistance there was from religious ideologies, I heavily believe Christianity hindered progress. Okay, there's one more part I wanted to respond to, and that's towards the end of the video where they talk about social cohesion.
The value of religion more generally. If you were going to talk about it in just general terms, meaning belief in supernatural things that can't be explained by a materialist universe, the social cohesion point would be the best case in favor of religion, is that virtually every study ever done has shown that social cohesion relies on a common orientation among people in order to build commonality between people.
So the idea is basically religion is a medium for people to form groups and have a sense of social cohesion, which is good for society. Now, I partially agree with this actually, but let me explain. I think there's a perfectly reasonable explanation on how religion in general came about. Human beings are social animals, and that's because in nature, evolution favors a group of animals who work together on tasks and form loyal tribes. These groups survive better than others who didn't have the same type of social structure, where people stuck together and scratch each other's backs. As a result, something that acts as a medium to form these tribes had to be created as a sort of glue to hold people together, and that was favored by evolution. Thus, religion was born, a common belief system that separated you and your friends from outsiders and encouraged nearby people to look out for each other. Now, again, I only sort of agree with Ben's point because I believe it was indeed necessary for our ancestors for survival, like I mentioned. But since we have formed a civilized society since then, we have established our morals and have a greater understanding of the world and human nature, and that sort of tribalistic behavior is no longer necessary. In fact, we now deem it as unethical since it raises questions of discrimination, for example, which wasn't a concern back when we had more primitive morals and only cared about survival. So yes, the formation of social cohesion helped in the past, but now it is nothing but detrimental in the modern world, because along with tribalism, it also comes with an us vs them mentality. If you look at that Israel-Hamas war, there's a perfect example of this. Anyway, that's the video today. I do encourage everyone to check out the original video. It's quite long, but it does have some interesting discussions in there that I didn't get a chance to go over today. Once again, I wanted to extend my thanks to Fireshard, Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, Rick Klen for their support on my Patreon. My upcoming scheduled releases may be slow in the next while due to Christmas and New Year plans, but we'll see.